that we have. It's a special
Right.
webinar that we have here. Again, just honoring, truth and reconciliation, and honoring Orange Shirt Day. And as a special kind of give back, we have this day today. So a few things that we're going to touch on today. So we will just discuss Canada's colonialism, its impacts, of course, in the context of truth and reconciliation, and the way forward in this session. So this session is really premised to assess our current understandings of colonization in Canada and its connection to Indigenous peoples, including how privilege and worldview impact our beliefs and behaviors. So this session will build upon the concept of self-determining in evaluation practice and how to better center the voices and community. So this workshop is the first of two workshops, and the second workshop will focus on this culturally responsive piece.
Yeah.
Before we get into the content, of course, just want to introduce ourselves a little bit more personally. My name is Amber Bedard. I currently calling in from the unceded and ancestral territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, where I'm really fortunate to live for the past few years. But I'm from Treaty 7 territory originally. I'm Blackfoot, so I come from Piikani First Nation, which is about 2 hours south of Mohkinstsis or Calgary, Alberta. Uh, yeah, I'm part of the team here at Reciprocal Consulting, but I will pass it over to Sophia to introduce herself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Amber. So yeah, today we just wanted to offer a little tidbit of some of the things that we share about in our work in honor of Truth and Reconciliation Day and Orange Shirt Day this Monday. I think a lot of the time we get the question, well, what can I do for Orange Shirt Day? How can I give back or learn? So we wanted to have a little offering here so folks can feel a bit more equipped to do that. But one thing that's really important is to learn the truth before we can move to action. So that's something that we're going to focus on today. We don't have our usual circle agreement today because it is a webinar style, but we do just want to make sure that you all feel safe and to just take breaks as you need if some of the content is heavy or aligned with your lived experience. Because we are going to talk about, of course, residential schools and some pretty harmful colonial impacts. So just wanted to share that note to take care of your hearts as well in that. Amber did mention that we'll have other series like this. This one will be a standalone, but at the end of our hour together, we'll give you some other examples of some of the workshops that we do in case you want to continue your learning. Before we dive right into what we're doing, it might be helpful because maybe you heard from a friend of a friend about this workshop today or webinar today. So we thought we'd share a little bit about who we are. As Amber mentioned, a lot of our context is with evaluation. We're an Indigenous owned evaluation and research firm, first and foremost. But Amber and I get to do a lot of the education. So while we were doing this work, we really realized there was a need for more education and more dialogue, not only about kind of status quo's perspectives on evaluation, but also the practice of culturally responsive evaluation. And then we respond to the need, so then we created some more anti-racism specific workshops as well. So yeah, that's a little bit about us. We can share our website after as well, so you can get to know us a little bit more. But we're an Indigenous owned consulting firm based on Capilano Reserve in West Vancouver on Squamish territory. And we're about 16 of us now working there. So if you want, I'm not super sure what the functions are of this webinar at the moment, but if you want, you can, if possible, you can add who you are and just say hello in the chat. And if you want to say something that's bringing you joy today, please feel free to do that too. But we won't depend on you to do that because I don't know if it's possible. So we'll check the chat as we go to see if it was possible, then we get to learn about this platform a bit more. So this is our schedule. I guess it's not the morning anymore for this early afternoon. First, we just want to do some context setting as Amber shared, a little bit of a glossary moment, just so that we can all have shared language about people's identities, which is so important. We're going to go a little bit into understanding colonial histories and how that influences today, and also what you can do next. And I'll pass it over to myself for this. So the first question that you may have, if if maybe you're calling in from a physics building today, which I know some people might be, um, what does indigeneity mean in this context on Turtle Island? Maybe you don't know what Turtle Island is either. So first, we're going to talk about some shared language about who the First Peoples of Canada are and continue to be. So First Peoples of Canada, um, also called Indigenous peoples, depending on who you ask, and what identity means to an individual or a community. But the Indigenous people here have diverse language, diverse ceremonies, tradition, history, and protocol. Canada is made up of a series of distinct nations. And in the Canadian Constitution, the Act recognizes that there's three distinct Aboriginal peoples in Canada. So as we talk about different things, you'll see there's different language, and it kind of denotes a moment in history of what was in the zeitgeist at that time for names of peoples. So historically, in our government documents, you'll see the term Aboriginal, which speaks to Indigenous people in Canada. And the three distinct peoples groups are First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. But in 2011, there is an estimated 1.4 million people in Canada that identify as Aboriginal. And that's about 4%, almost, I think now higher. It's closer to 5% of the population in Canada.
Awesome. So you'll see a few different, terminologies. Maybe you've heard different terminology to refer to Indigenous peoples. And so there are many terms that we can discuss here, but for the purposes of time, we're going to focus on these three definitions. So Indigenous is really the most agreed upon and used when talking about one or three of the terms as referring to First Nations peoples, Métis, and Inuit. Indigenous, again, is that just that self-preference. But of course, when we're referring to people, people always prefer to be identified as who they are and where they come from. So for myself, of course, I'm an Indigenous person, but I'm also a First Nations woman, and I'm also a member of Beacony, and I'm Blackfoot. So I prefer to be called, a Blackfoot person. Aboriginal is again and it's a more outdated term, again previously noted in a lot of legal documents, government documents to describe the First Peoples of Canada. And again, still does exist, but it's kind of more of that outdated term. And then we will talk about Indian, the word Indian. So this one, of course, is a legal government term as well, dating back to the creation of the Indian Act. However, this term can be considered a slur or a race-based insult that was first used by the Canadian government. So today, again, non-Indigenous people should not use this word, of course, unless it's in a very specific context, like talking about the Indian Act. And again, you might hear this word being used as reclamation by Indigenous peoples to simply as part of their identity, and that usually is kind of the older generation or in terms of reclamation, but should generally not be used.
Thanks, Amber. So we are going to give a little bit more detail about the three distinct groups here in Canada of peoples. We do have some videos to share, but while I set up, I'll pass it over to Amber for this first slide here.
Great. So just want to quickly mention the concept of Turtle Island. Indigenous people specifically, it's an origin story coming from out east, the Anishinaabe refer to Turtle Island as North America. So if you take a look at a North American map and you kind of zoom out, it looks like a turtle. And of course, there's this whole beautiful origin story attached to Turtle Island, but that's kind of where this comes from. And again, beautiful artwork as well presented. Is she coming? Is she up?
Well, I'll put it up for the next slide.
Okay. So as Sophia talked about, we do have three distinct groups of Indigenous peoples in Canada. So First Nations is the first group that we'd like to mention. So First Nations people are Indigenous people who do not identify as Inuit or Métis. First Nations people, again, have lived across Canada, Turtle Island since time immemorial, forever. Again, every nation has different languages, cultures, and spiritual beliefs. So your worldview and who you are is so different from coast to coast. So for many thousands of years, First Nations peoples, of course, were stewards of the land and resources, having complex government laws and traditions. Our societies were very intricate, complex, and included systems for, trade and commerce, building relationships, managing resources, and spirituality. So also an emphasis on holism. So all these parts accumulate and come together. And today, of course, many communities maintain their culture and traditions that have been alive and practiced for thousands of years. With the formation of the Government of Canada, of course, that way of life was impacted and changed. So the government developed policies that forced the system of banned governments onto First Nations so that they could no longer use their own system of government. And again, we teach courses about this, so we can go into quite a bit of detail on how this happened, but
okay, sorry.
got it.
My transitions are not super good right now. My mouse died, so I'm just okay. So we're just going to show a quick video about the Métis identity, which is different. So I will do that now. And thank you for letting us know that the comments don't work. Apologies. Then there we go. There we go. Okay.
Sophia, we can't hear the sound.
You are raised in your culture, you knew your history, but most of all, you didn't have to be told. You knew it, you lived it.
Well, certainly us as Métis people know who we are and have always known who we are. But, Métis is one of the Indigenous peoples of Canada, clearly in the Constitution of Canada under Section 35.
Métis people, sometimes when you think of Indigenous peoples of Canada, there's, like First Nations, there's Inuit, and people think Métis, but at the same time, like, we're not just kind of grouped in with First Nations, like we're our own people, we have our own voice.
Je vois le peuple métis comme une personne autonome qui a l'autonomie et qui a une culture et une langue mixte.
I think that if educators could relay that story to their Métis students, that you're part of a family and a community that is distinct, they have their own culture and they have their own language, then the kids can go with a positive message and want to connect and understand.
We have a word that's Otepemsoak, and that's we own ourselves. We are free people. We look after ourselves. And they have truly stood behind that from all history that we can look back on.
Because of that, that's why we as a Métis people are resilient. We're entrepreneurs. We're also people that can adapt.
I believe that Métis people have shown that they have built an economy. They have shown that they take ownership of their language, and they continue to show that throughout the decades.
To be Métis in 2020 is to kind of take ownership over your own identity. I don't necessarily think there's like a one-stop answer for it. Like even what it is to be Métis for myself might be different for another person.
It's really important for educators to know not all the kids look Métis. There's no one way of looking Métis. You could learn one thing and the other family does it differently. And you have to respect that and like let them teach you or let yourself learn from community around them.
So I think that it's very important to establish ourselves as a distinct people with a distinct language and a distinct way of being.
The language is the essence of our culture. And for me, being a Métis man, that's how I identify that I'm distinct. If you know the language or have an understanding about language, that is the essence of the culture.
So we'll pause it there. I think yeah, so we can share this video as well later on, but just yeah, we'll follow up with it after. I think you oh sorry, go ahead, Amber.
Oh, just to just transition though. So I was talking about First Nations identity, and because I'm a First Nations person, of course, but we don't have a Métis person on the call, so that's why we're kind of offering that video for that more fulsome perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And the distinctions-based approach is really important to our work as we do research with Indigenous peoples and families, because for the Métis perspective, there hasn't been a lot of data on their own lived experiences and access to resources. So when they share about the distinctions-based in our lens of our work, ensuring that there's distinct reports and findings for Métis communities is really important. We're going to show another quick video just to have a quick snapshot of some of the Inuit ways of life. We have a video, it's a little bit of a different tone. It's from, I think, National Geographic. So it's a little bit more focused on like rugged terrain, but it is an interesting watch. So we'll play that now quickly as well.
Inuit were born to be outside. My earliest memories of growing up with my family was connected to the land. Using dog teams, skin tents, hayaks. You lived on the land. You took what you needed. We didn't have electric power. We didn't have modern conveniences of any sort. We just lived a very simple and happy, content life. Inuit should never forget where we came from, the values that we were taught. Without those values and those skills, we would never have survived. We've seen a lot of changes in the North in 50, 60 years. As a traditional Inuit hunter, I still try to harvest and utilize the land and the sea as the way we did, but The world has changed. I feel such an honor and such a privilege to be able to connect with Inuit in Greenland, Nunavik, Nunavut, and the Inuvialuit regions. As a hunter or as a carver, we try to share stories, we try to share what we're harvesting, methods and means, what's available. At the end of the day, they're all our cousins, we're all connected. That's one thing that I don't want us to lose. Our culture has to be practiced in order to be strong.
Awesome. I always kind of get like chills when I watch that video. It's so cool. Um, Back from commercial break. So just a little bit of context. So again, Inuit peoples have lived in, the Arctic, and kind of northern above and below the 49th parallel. There have been for thousands of years. So traditionally they lived off of resources and land, of course, as we see in the video, hunting whales, seals, caribou, fish, and other birds. And again, harvesting these resources for community. Yeah, anything to add here, Sophia?
No, I would ask if there's any questions, but for another time. Yeah, so we're gonna move into, we just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of who we're speaking of when we talk about Indigenous folks. So we are going to go now into more of the historical context, including a little bit about the Indian Act, just for understanding that residential schools wasn't kind of a blip, but a part of systemic approaches to assimilation and genocide. So taking a shift over to that.
Yeah, and really just thinking about it in kind of this holistic perspective, like in order to understand where we are today, we really have to connect back to past and really address perceptions and understandings, as also misconceptions and maybe some untruths, if you will, in order to have that full, complete picture. So we do that by talking a little bit about the relationship with First Nations peoples upon contact. So until about the 18th century, depending on where you were, the relationship between First Nations peoples and the colonial settlers, or the people who arrived, was based on mutual interests of commercial and military interests. And there were there was a valuable alliance kind of being formed when we think about it, whether it's the British, the Dutch, the French, they came here to this land and thinking one thing, and they get here and it's a whole different story. So they really needed the peoples and the communities to show how to utilize the land. And there's a few different words in different languages, and I know one of the words in my language, that when they talk about it and they describe the people who came, it's described in a way of like the people who can't take care of themselves, and it's kind of funny, but it's like they arrived and they were just in poor shape. They couldn't, and so again, really leaning on Indigenous wisdom of the land and the territory to be able to survive. And so we see this power dynamic kind of being formed. As we progress a little bit further, settlers were a little bit more comfortable and again didn't need that direct support from First Nations peoples. And so we see the shift in power kind of change. So we also see at this point in time tensions between worldview. So settlers believed that they had ownership of the land. They could have ownership and dominate the land in a way that is just not, not a thing for many communities. And so again, we see this tension kind of arrive and happen. So what was once based on a relationship that was based on mutual respect and need kind of slowly shifted to where Indigenous peoples were viewed as an inconvenience to accessing land and resources and building a life that the settlers wanted. And of course, within this mix, we have, notions of Christianity and white supremacy and paternalism and all these ingredients that kind of stirred the pot, if you will. So over the next 150 years, this is kind of where we see the introduction of the Indian policy and legislation, the civilization program in Canada, and the introduction of what is known as the Indian Act. So the Indian Act, again, this document holds all these ingredients that we've been talking about. So again, white supremacy, notions of Christianity, superiority, racial superiority, these concepts. But in simple terms, the Indian Act is a Canadian federal law that governs in matters pertaining to Indian status, bans, and Indian reserves. So when we started to talk about First Nations peoples earlier, kind of mentioned this a little bit. And again, this is specific to First Nations peoples, so it does not include the Métis or the Inuit in this through this lens. So it really has structured, this document has structured the relationship between Indigenous peoples and the government for the past 150 years. And its purpose and its intent was really to assimilate, control, and eradicate. And it's kind of again, when we talk about the rollout of residential schools, we talk about the rollout of a lot of the injustices that we now are able to put a voice to. It really does lead back to the Indian Act. Like I talked about earlier, I mentioned the few ingredients that really held and continue to hold this document in place. So the Indian Act is really upheld by paternalism, white supremacy, the doctrine of discovery as well. So just this notion that colonists had the right and authority to take claim over the land, over new lands, and over Indigenous peoples. This terra nullius, the concept that these lands, these new lands were blank, nobody lived here, and that they were ripe for kind of taking. And also connected to these two concepts is the papal bulls, where, again, linking back to Christianity, where the Pope gave permission to conquer and to take, essentially. And really this belief of valuing wealth and resources over Indigenous life. So all of these ingredients kind of came together to make this document form. And of course, over a series of years, it's just didn't poof, come out of nowhere, of course, but really led to the culmination of this document. All right. So there's a few notions that we'd like to focus in on when we talk about the Indian Act, of course. The Indian Act is criticized for its gender discrimination against women-faced discrimination and gender bias within this document. So Indigenous women are excluded from rights. For example, you would lose your status if you married a non-status man. However, in the opposite, it's not the same. So if a status man married a non-status woman, that woman would gain status, and therefore her children would gain status, and so on and so forth. So we have this discriminatory lens. And again, when you lost your status, you lost right to your community, to treaty benefits, the right to even go into your community at a point in time, the right to be buried with your people, with your community, etc. So there was a lot happening there. But of course, through advocacy of some amazing women, specifically Yvonne Bedard and Sandra Lovelace, really advocated and kind of went through this process of going through not only the Supreme Court to the highest court, but also to the UN. And of course, the Supreme Court of Canada said this actually isn't discriminatory. So these women are like, nope, we're going to take it higher. And then they went to the UN. And so eventually we see this kind of change. And a lot of this work happened in the 1970s, but a lot of women and a lot of community members really advocated for this. So this is where we see this amendments with Bill C-31.
Awesome. Thank you, Amber. Amber is such an expert in this, not only through education, but through, needing to know what governs. So appreciate that, Amber. And you might be thinking, okay, but I thought we were talking about Orange Shirt Day today, so why are we here? And I think one part that is missing from some shorter information about Orange Shirt Day in residential schools is that residential schools wasn't something that came out of nowhere, but it's a really integrated element of this Indian Act, of this Constitution, of the building blocks of Canada. Included in the Indian Act is also the reserve system, which did not allow people to leave. We could do a whole other workshop on that. Also banding council, so the imposition of government, that was a completely different way of governing. So all these different impositions on the way of life, of governance, of leadership, and even aiming towards children and women is it's all outlined in the UN's definition of genocide. So this very purposeful attacking of these parts of civilization and society. We do have a really beautiful video that shares about the experience of residential school from Chief Robert Joseph. And I think what we'll do is we'll share it in our follow-up email after this, just in we only have a little bit of time left with you all. We know you have to go eat lunch and stuff. So we'll share that. And yeah, so also say residential schools happened over 3 to 4 generations. This other video we're going to share about Phyllis Webstad, she shares about her experience. So if you think about for the first generation having experiences of every type of abuse you can think of, and then having to send their children, and those children having to send their own children. So it's a big span of time of a forced removal of children from communities. And if you're in the Lower Mainland, this is a map of where the residential schools are near us. And then this is a map of British Columbia. So you can see the different concentration of residential schools in more rural areas. Yeah, just to get some context as to where this was all happening. I think probably many of you have heard of residential schools, but some main things to take away is that the last one closed in 1996 in Saskatchewan. So really recently, went on for over 100 years. And there was also other elements that even though the last school closed in 96, day schools continued on after, which had a lot of the same abuses and traumas as residential schools, but people were allowed to go home after the day. And a lot of residential schools were changed to day schools, but because they were so rural and didn't allow for children to transfer to other schools, in practice it remained residential, where people weren't able to go home. I think too, part of the Indian Act, the intention, there was 3 really powerful elements that allowed for this all to happen. One was the government needing a solution to people that were on this land that they were building on. So assimilation through the government. It was also the churches really supported people feeling validated in this these types of racism and superiorities, as Amber mentioned. The third power at play here was actually labor. So to be able to build a new civilization on Canada, there was labor needed to do that. And so the residential school, the intention was to also build up a workforce of low paid, physical and like second class labor for white families to have like live-in maids. And so children were only taught a couple hours of education a month, and the rest was domestic labor or trades taught to children. So to know why this continued on for this long, it's important to know about those pillars of power in place. Yeah. So we wanted to do anything else to add there, Amber?
Nope.
Okay. This is definitely new for us to not have people to interact with, so we'll just continue on. You can ask questions. If you have burning questions for the Q&A, then we can answer them after or as we go. So we're just going to pivot a little bit to an individual story. So this is kind of why we're here today, honoring this young person who is now an adult. So this is just a little bit about what the Orange Shirt Society aims to do. But as you look at that, I'm going to set up a quick video of this human who's an adult now, talking about her experience in residential schools and why we're all here today wearing orange shirts and why we have the day off on Monday. So the day off on Monday isn't supposed to be just a long weekend. It's supposed to be a space of learning and of reflection. So that's also why we're here. Okay.
And just name it as well. Again, residential schools, these children, experienced a variety of things, again, across the spectrum of abuse, physical, psychological, emotional, sexual, all of these things, of course, occurred throughout a significant time span. And again, this is very real and close to the time frame that we have. So again, 1996 is really not that long ago. So these wounds are still quite fresh, but yeah. And just when we think about it as well, so for clarity and for context.
Here, Amber?
Nope.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Maybe I wasn't even sharing screen.
Nope.
I like muted myself and was like listening. Okay, here we go. Sorry. Here's Phyllis Webstead sharing about her story.
Wade Wahwadip, Phyllis Webstad Rensquest, Stracham Chatstam Stlakwan. I'm speaking to you today from Shawetmach Ulach, the land of the Shuswap people in Williams Lake, BC. I'm third generation Indian residential school survivor. My grandmother attended for 10 years from 1925 to 1935. All of Granny's 10 children, including my mother, attended for 10 years from 1954 to 1964. I attended residential school in 1973-74. We all attended the St. Joseph Mission Indian Residential School, simply called the Mission, located just minutes from Williams Lake. My son also attended the last operating residential school in Canada when it closed in Saskatchewan in 1996. To tell my story, I was living with my granny as a child, and when I turned 6 in July of 1973, Granny took me to town to buy me something new to wear for my first day of residential school. I chose a shiny new shirt. It was bright and exciting, just how I felt to be going to school for the first time. When I arrived at the mission, my shiny new shirt was taken away. No matter how much I cried and wanted it back, no one would listen. I never wore my shirt again. Thoughts of home and Granny's garden, fishing for salmon on the Fraser River, are all memories that helped me through that year at residential school. Although the mission remained open until 1981, I never returned. I was able to attend a one-room schoolhouse just minutes from Granny's house in Dog Creek. The memories of that orange shirt being taken away and the lack of caring by those who controlled us kept me from wearing orange for a long time in my life, as the sight of orange would trigger memories of my experiences and the effects of my life from attendance at that school. I told my orange shirt story for the first time in April 2013, when preparation for when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came to Williams Lake. Those involved with the event decided to honor the orange shirt as a symbol of the effects of residential schools and the need for Every Child Matters. Originally, Orange Shirt Day was focused on the Caribou-Chilcotin region, but thanks to social media, it continues to grow and have a life of its own, and has grown into what it is today. My orange shirt story is not unique. There were 150,000 children that attended the residential schools across Canada, and they, or their families, all have a story to tell of that experience. And now, with the recent news of the confirmation of the 215 children announced at the Kamloops de Shawetmach on May 27, 2021, another experience from those schools is brought forward. I, like many Canadians, have felt the emotional impact of those findings. But for the survivors, we have always known about the children who died in those schools. This is why I say confirmation instead of discovery. Even so, when I first heard, I felt like I had lost a family member, and that's how much grief I felt. There are many more residential school sites to be searched, and the number of missing children and unmarked burials will continue to rise.
Yeah, so we just wanted to give you a little snapshot. There's a lot more resources on the Orange Shirt Society's website that we can share as well. But so that reality of Phyllis's own child having to go to residential school after her is something that a lot of people experienced. We did also want to share a few other pieces of our colonial history that has an impact on our systems today. So we don't have too much time left, as we want to get you back to lunch. But we did want to share about segregated hospitals in BC and across Turtle Island, across Canada. So these were open from the 1990s to the 80s. They were open because of tuberculosis and because of the racist notion that tuberculosis that manifests within Indigenous people, it was deadlier, dirtier, and more harmful to white people. So that was under this guise of medical research, which is, of course, completely wrong. And so the funding that was, or the infrastructure to open these hospitals remained to be able to basically segregate healthcare from then on out. So the children that were harmed and neglected in residential schools were then, that weren't able to stay because of their health, were brought to these segregated hospitals. This is one in Nanaimo, so really close to us, and they were treated with the same kind of abuse, sexual, physical, mental, emotional, as they were in the schools, and they were all isolated and segregated, so they couldn't interact with other children. But this wasn't only children, it was all ages of people. There's a huge history of this in Canada. A lot of the medical research that we have is based on unethical treatment of Indigenous people. There's a book called Between Two Beds, I believe. I can source it after, about this history we have. Also, our food pyramid was research done in these hospitals and in residential schools. So that empirical data that can only really be created by doing inhumane testing on people. So really important for us to think about this. And in our work, that we do a lot of work with not-for-profits and the healthcare system, these are the real life implications on why Indigenous people have a hard time accessing healthcare, and also the echo of racism that still exists today because of these roots. The other thing we wanted to mention was in our systems, though residential schools were closed in 1996, the scooping of children continued. So rather than being put in institutions, they were taken to individual homes straight from birth many times. And at this point, you might be thinking, how did Canada allow for the direct taking of children? And there was a really, really purposeful and rigorous propaganda around Indigenous children not being cared for in their homes and people being unfit to care for them. And so there was ads in the newspaper about children needing homes, and almost like the SPCA with having a photo of a child that was needing to be adopted. So just this, of course, influences our foster care system, the Ministry of Children and Family Development, the MCFD is really tied to this. And so over 50% of children in care here in Canada are Indigenous, with, of course, only 5% of the population. So these numbers and these inequities remain as part of this ongoing colonialism. We do want to leave the last 10 minutes to talk about the resilience, as well as what you can do after this. So I'll pass it over to Amber to mention.
Yeah, and again, there's so much to say here. So again, this is, of course, the history that we've kind of walked you through, but there's so much to say about advocacy. So throughout this time period, Indigenous peoples weren't just standing by. There are many examples of activism and, standing up and refuting a lot of these circumstances. Again, don't have time to get into it, but there are very key integral moments that have happened and have transpired. And of course, when we talk about resilience and resistance, of course, Indigenous peoples can be any way that they want to be. In the sense of course, resilience is one aspect, this ability to rebound after difficult circumstances. But of course, within that, there's grief, there's anger, there's distress, there's all of these things that are still very present in a part of the healing journey. Are we?
Yeah.
We have a little bit of time to talk about power and privilege.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good idea. So, so what do you all have on the call? Well, we have this ability to learn and to mobilize some of the learnings from today. So we want to use our positionality and our privilege to be allies, which we'll talk about in a second. But just wanting to to plant that seed of that importance of using our voices in case not everyone knows about this information. So just quickly, intersectionality. I don't know how I could do that quickly, but there's different identities with different levels of power. And so we kind of encourage you all to reflect on where you are at in those intersections to be able to contribute to the reconciliation movement. So maybe we can talk about that too. So for everyone here, there is going to be a call to action that's relevant to your work. So this, we can't really go into how this was made, but this commission was built upon the experiences and the stories of survivors of residential schools, and also from experiences of the families that for people who didn't make it. So that's really important to think about. But everyone on this call has some connection to a call to action on here that they can implement in their own work. So we encourage you to take a look at this document to see what you can do to contribute to the movement. The main reason that we want that is because there have been other commissions, and we don't want to do research because we're researchers. We don't want to do research that doesn't bring action. So it's really important for us to value the stories that have been shared in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and to keep it alive and to keep talking about it and to keep seeing how we can contribute.
And
So
these calls to action are for all Canadians. So everyone has a role to play in here. And a really great example of a way to utilize this perhaps in your workplace of work is starting a book club, you know, kind of walking through and reading these calls to action, like put it to heart, because there's really a lot of beautiful things that we can apply respectively, not only in our workplaces, but also in our personal lives as well.
yeah, thanks, Amber. Yeah, so I think we really wanted to invite you all to this conversation so that you can get some ideas of how to really engage in Orange Shirt Day, learn a little bit about where it came from and why it's important that we don't use Monday as a day off, but use it as a place of reflection and learning, and also with connecting with your community. So in our little slide here about action, there are many different things that you can do this weekend and on Monday, different events you can attend in our community. I'll put this in the chat. So we encourage you to go out to community events and see what's happening, because it's all our community that we're working in. The last thing I'll leave you with is if you could take like a seed with you and plant it within another person that maybe doesn't know the information we shared today, or maybe they need a reminder to reprioritize it. We do have some other courses. So we have this course. This is Introduction to Truth and Reconciliation, but usually it's 3 hours long and usually we get to see you. So if you think that's something valuable for your family, maybe that's, you know, you want to do it over dinner, Thanksgiving dinner, or maybe for your workplace, you think it could be really valuable to learn more about this and think about how truth and reconciliation can be in your work. We also have another course that's From Silence to Action. So Amber and I have been in a lot of different spaces with a lot of things that have been said that have been inappropriate. So our team has created this course to help people leave that kind of freeze stage and help the situation resolve and to de-escalate. So that's another course we have if you're a little bit more advanced or are excited to learn. But most of all, just really grateful for all of you for joining us today. And what we're going to do is we're going to follow up with an email with some resources and a little call to action for you to share some of your learnings from today. And yeah, just really grateful for everyone that came out.
Yeah, and just to end things off in a good way, so Dr. Chief Robert Joseph, who was a really integral part of the creation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, you know, there's this quote by him that's, I think, just sums it up. So he says, reconciliation will mean many things to many people. It will be big, it will be small, it will be simple, it will be complex. There are a multiplicity of ways and levels to explore, but remember that it begins with you. So there's not a person on earth who cannot affect reconciliation. And so I think that's a beautiful, beautiful way to end. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Again, it's a true pleasure and honor to be able to do this. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And well, oh, there are some questions maybe. All right. Beth says thank you. Thank you, Beth, for being here. And thank you, Diana. And the next time we're here, we'll have a chat. So we are learning. Thanks, everybody. Have a good
Take
luck.
care. Bye.